I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today, I have my special guest. He's award winning author and a best selling too, no other than Mr. S.C. Gowland.
Hello, Daniel. How are you? Are you all right?
I'm fabulous like you, Mr. Gowland, and thank you for your time. And can you please again introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello, everybody. I'm SC Gowland. I'm a fantasy author based out of England in the UK. I'm a writer of adventurous, wonderful, magical fantasy novels, and I'm here today to talk about the second book in my Souls Abyss trilogy. The second book being Coven of Shadows.
Mr. Gowland, before we go on to the second book, let's do the recap of the novels that we talk about. Number one, we talk about Delusions and Dragons.
Yeah. We did, yes. Delusions and Dragons is sort of the is kind of a standalone, but is a bit of a fun introduction to the universe of the Souls Abyss. It only came out just over a month or so ago, and it seems to be selling quite well at the moment, which is always encouraging. The book that we discussed, which is the first in the series of the Souls Abyss, is a book called The Dark Crown, which was my first ever fantasy book and was a semi-finalist in the self-published fantasy blog off SPF BO6, and was also a semi-finalist in the book blog novel of the year competition back in 2020. We're here today to talk about the second book in the Souls Abyss trilogy, which is Coven of Shadows. And to be honest, this is my favourite out of the trilogy, where everything starts to get a little bit more dangerous.
Every author that they producing trilogy, the second book is their favorite. Why is that?
Well, it's a very good question, Daniel. I don't know. It's kind of like the second book is sometimes the hardest book. Like it's the second difficult album after you've released your first one and you think you know what you're doing. When you actually come to write the second one, you've got to start all over again. And you very much feel like a novice and sometimes lack a bit of confidence in your own writing abilities. But I have to say that Coven of Shadows was the book. It's my favorite out of all of the books that I've written, and I think it's because I'd spent so long writing the first one. I just jumped straight into writing the second, and it gets far more interesting because there are more points of view, and there's a couple of things that have happened in the first book, and the Coven of Shadows kind of picks up where we left off at the end of the first book, literally to the moment, and we start to see the bad guys, the dark side of things, and that's where things get very interesting because writing good guys is interesting and fun, but writing bad guys is far more interesting, and you can let yourself go a little bit.
Oh, yes. So are you the writer that you focus on the villain or the hero?
I wrote both sides. I wrote the villain and the hero, just from the point of view that I wanted to be able to show the two together, kind of the opposite sides of the mirror, kind of the good side and the dark side, because there are a number of similarities between them, from the point of view that they both have similar domestic circumstances. They're both dads. They have families to look after. They have ambitions. They want to do right by their families, but they don't really know how to do it very well. And that's kind of a thing for all parents, is that you can read books on how to raise kids and be a parent, but there's a million different points of view, and there's no right way or wrong way, really. It's just the approach you choose to take. So what we see within Coven of Shadows is that we see our hero, which is Kaelden, dealing with his family and his circumstances, and we see the other side of things from the point of view of his evil opposite, his nemesis, who has caused some problems for Kael'dan in the first book.
Very well said, Mr. Gowland. So, Coven of Shadows, The Souls Abyss, Book 2. What behind the title of your second book?
Second book, yeah, this one was a bit harder because I wanted something that sounded cool. To be honest, I didn't want anything that sounded boring, so I went again with I looked at different things. I like the idea of shadows and darkness, and that's something that you can say about all of the titles of the books in the Souls Abyss trilogy, because you've got the Dark Crown, Coven of Shadows, again alluding to darkness, and the final book, which is Darkness Falls. So Coven of Shadows was basically to really, this was the bit where everything gets worse, everything gets harder for our hero, and in some ways things get harder for the villains as well, for the bad guys. So it's Razian is the main bad guy, and he's quite horrible, really. He's not a very nice person at all, but he has challenges of his own, and things don't go according to plan, even though he thinks he's doing the right thing and he's planned for absolutely everything. But what he soon learns is that there's no such thing as a plan going exactly as you expect it to. There's always something that you don't realize could be a problem, and in this case, it's members of his own family that are causing him problems. So it's very much a darker book. It's far more epic from the point of view that the final third of the book is the most fun that I've had in writing a book ever, I think, because I just completely went with my imagination, and um, I really didn't plot very heavily at all. And the last line of Coven of Shadows is actually my favourite last line of any of the books that I've written so far, because it sets everything up so beautifully for the third and final book in the trilogy.
Interesting, Mr. Gowland. So, Coven of Shadows, how did you craft it?
I crafted it in the same sort of way that I've crafted all of my books, in that I have an idea of what I want to do, and what I'll do is I don't do huge outlines. I don't plan extensively. What I do is that I'll sort of break it into pieces, and I'll see what are the three main things that I want to happen within the book, and then I'll sort of work through chapter by chapter, moving points of view as things go along, and um, just put one or two bullet points within what needs to happen within each chapter to get to the end. Now, exactly what level of detail I go to, and exactly how we make that particular thing happen, is very, and particularly within this book, there was a character that appeared as part of the process, and she started out as a minor character, but as I kind of wrote the book and got into more detail and found my feet and a bit of rhythm with it, she had far more importance than I originally intended, and she was actually the character I liked the most out of all of the ones that I wrote within the book, because she was, I could do things with her that I couldn't do with other characters. I'm not going to name who it is, because there are an equal split of male and female characters, but Coven of Shadows was very much just my imagination running wild within a rough description and a rough plan of what had to happen to make the book work, and set things up for the third book within the trilogy.
So, let's talk the main character of the second book. What can you say about
Although,
it?
well, I suppose the best thing to, because we spoke about the main good guy in the first book, I'll speak a bit more about Razian, who is the main bad guy in the second book, because he appears at the end of the first book, which is not a spoiler at all. There are some things that he does do that I'm not gonna go into detail, because it does give away a few spoilers, but he's a huge amount of fun to write. He's clearly a very troubled man, but he's a man of singular vision. He knows what he wants. He has a destiny that he believes he should achieve, that he's entitled to. and he will let nothing stop him from doing that. But within that, he does do certain things that you would expect, but he has a bit of a heart as well. He's not as clever as he thinks, and he's not as perfect as he thinks, but equally he's not quite as ruthless as he thinks either. And the other side of it is that, like I say, his own family and his own background and how he's come to be in this position of power become evident, and you find out a bit more about him, and in particular you find out about his mother, who is a quite a significant source of inspiration and frustration for him, because she's helping out but getting in his way and doesn't always agree with his way of doing things. But yeah, Razian is a classic bad guy. You understand him, you sympathize with him to a certain extent, because he knows what he wants and he wants to get there. But it's just, would other people have done it the same way? I don't know. But certainly Razian was a very important character within the book. When I was actually writing it, I pictured Mads Mikkelsen in the role, the Danish actor who was in Casino Royale, and he's been in Hannibal and a whole load of other films. But he's got that kind of dark, stoic exterior, and piercing eyes and that sort of things. He was who I imagined in that role. So if one day my trilogy gets made into a film or a series of films, I know exactly who I'm going to cast for each role.
Oh, interesting indeed, Mr. Gowland. But before we go on, I want to shout out these countries listening to me according to my Apple chart. In Tanzania, I got 31 spot. Thank you so much. In Ghana, number 37. In Rwanda, I'm number 47 on Apple chart. And in Zambia, 114. And of course, in Mongolia at number 14, Libya at number 27, Cameroon at number 68, Algeria at number 75, Denmark at number 82, Romania at 92, Egypt at 132, Canada 135, and Georgia at 201. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast, because this podcast is created to empower writers all over the world, like Mr. S.C. Gowland. So, Mr. Gowland, Coven of Shadows, Book 2 of the Souls Abyss, what is the best highlight?
And the best highlight is it's two things. I suppose there is we return to the city of our hero's birth within the or sort of, should I say, rather than the city of his birth, the city where he grew up. And it's very much a bittersweet return, because he has to share some bad news with somebody who he has a great affection for, an old teacher of his. He has to share some very bad news with them. But the most spectacular part of the book is, without a shadow of a doubt, the final battle at the end, or the final fight at the end, which kind of builds and builds, because there are things happening within the story that Caeldon has to change the way that he does things, and in some respects, many of the things that he believes in, or the things that he believed to be true, are actually not true. So there are elements of bits of Star Wars Empire Strikes Back. There are obviously big spoilers and big reveals in that, in the same way there are big reveals and big twists in Coven of Shadows. So yeah, the battle at the end was absolutely magical. It was wonderful. I pictured the whole thing in my head as I was writing it. It's got a humor to it. It's fairly grisly in parts and quite bloody, but it is magical, and there's a reason to it. And there's also the introduction of a very mysterious new character who comes to comes to be far more important in the final book, and maybe far more important in the final series, once I've actually decided what to do with them. But the final battle at the end is absolutely the main spectacle, the most exciting part of the book.
Coven of Shadows, is it a sequel or prequel of the first book?
Um, it's a sequel to the first book because the Dark Crown is very much sets everything up, and we finish the Dark Crown at a certain point in the story, and we start up with Coven of Shadows literally a moment later. So it's they're very much sort of one huge book cut into two. We at the end of Coven of Shadows, we're at a period of time whereby um, there's kind of a delay. There's a bit of a break between the the events at the end of book two and where we start in book three. So it is very much it's a series of books that you can read at pace and enjoy, and there's this kind of a logic to it, and you won't get lost, but equally you can start with book two, and you could just dive straight in and go from there. You don't necessarily have to read book one, but there are no prologues. Everything's kind of nicely written, and I would say that from the point of view that you can just enjoy it as a standalone.
Oh, yes, that'd be awesome because some of the trilogy that you need to read book one so that you can grasp all the story. That's amazing, Mr. Garland. Covens of Shadows, what do you think? The flaws.
The flaws. That's a good question. I'm going to be a bit arrogant, and I'm going to say it doesn't have any flaws, Daniel. I think the it it changes from the first book because the first book is very much written from one point of view, from the point of view of the good guys. The this Coven of Shadows is more expansive, is wider. You get more points of view, more information, so you can actually start to see how things how we've ended up where we are, and how people have ended up in certain situations. The I suppose the only flaw is I would like to have gone into a bit more detail to do with the origins of some of the bad guys. It's it it's one of those things that I intend to explore in future books. Is what are the origins of some of the people, and I allude to a bit of past history and events that haven't been included in any of the books, and they're very much sort of the origins of the whole series. But yeah, I suppose if there is a flaw, I would have liked to have gone into more with the characters on the dark side of things.
Yes, indeed. I like your answer, Mr. Gallant, because every time I ask this question, authors are hesitate to answer, and I like the way you answered it bravely. So, Coven of Shadows, which chapters you like writing with?
There is there was one particular chapter I really enjoyed, and it relates to the meeting of Caelden meets up with a long lost love, somebody who he didn't expect to find, and who reappears sort of out of nowhere, and it catches him completely off guard, completely off balance. And there's something that happens within that chapter that I loved writing. It was one of it just I didn't plan for it. I didn't have it as one of my bullet points to achieve within that chapter. My mind just went on an adventure, and it was absolutely unexpected in what happened, and kind of unexpected in the way that it went, but it was a huge amount of fun in the way that he reacts to the arrival of this this long lost love from his childhood, and that brings with it a whole load of fresh challenges and pressures and stress and thoughts about what could have been and what might still be. So that was my favorite chapter.
Yes, indeed, Coven of Shadows. What are your struggles?
The struggles were to keep everything on the straight and narrow because, like I say, there's so many things I could have put in there, relating to the history of the world, and where the magic had come from, and how certain people have got into positions of power, and the other side of it is that there's trauma revealed, relating to friends of Caelden, and because you can't have friends and backup characters that are boring. They've got to have their own challenges and their own issues and this sort of thing. So I probably would have liked to have gone into more detail, um, from that particular point of view. But that may be something that I get to when I actually return to this trilogy in a couple of years' time. But overall, yeah, definitely, I would have liked more depth. And a bit more time, but I did want to keep it to a certain word count, and I think I've been able to do both quite nicely.
What are the intervals of writing those three books? The Abyss trilogy.
They were written pretty much one after the other, to be honest. Like I say, the Dark Crown was written very much at the start of lockdown in early 2020. Coven of Shadows was followed very, very quickly, to be honest. I'd actually finished writing it at the end of 2020. So I'd written sort of 250,000 words by the end of that year. The third book, Darkness Falls, was probably the hardest to write because I didn't know how to finish it. I knew roughly what I wanted to do, but there were a lot of different ways that it could have ended. And I had a list of characters that I wanted to survive, and I had a list of characters that I wanted to kill off. And I did spend quite a number of months deciding who was to live and who was to die, and the the that was probably the biggest delay in finishing the trilogy. In that there are some quite significant deaths at the end of book three. Definitely one or two that you will not expect. And this comes back to the Game of Thrones thing that you should be able to kill off almost any character at any time for any reason, just because it keeps the reader on their toes a little bit, and you don't want a story thinking, well, all of the characters are going to live and it's all going to be happily ever after. Within this trilogy, there is definitely not a happy ever after for all characters. There are for some, but not for all of them. So that was the who was to live and who was to die was definitely the cause of the biggest delay.
Oh, that will be the climax, people. It's just like watching Game of Thrones. Do you love Game of Thrones, Mr. Gowland?
I do completely. I've read all of the books, and they're huge. They're absolutely enormous books. They're beautifully written, and I can see why people completely obsess about them and love them with as much as they do. There is an awful lot of descriptions of food. You can literally have an entire scene based around a dinner table, and the dialogue takes up 20 pages, and 20 pages is also taken up by the descriptions of the food and the way that it's cooked and the way that it tastes and smells and all that sort of thing. Yeah, but I really loved Game of Thrones, and I have to say that I found the television series to be quite satisfying as well. I don't think it deserved quite as much criticism as it got. It wasn't perfect, and they did seem to sort of throw it together a bit, but there were certain bits that a lot of people didn't find satisfying that I strangely did. So I don't know whether that means I have good taste or bad taste, but I did enjoy it tremendously. A fantastic series, but it will be good when he actually releases the final book.
You describe the writing of Mr. George Martin. What is it?
Um, his writing is epic. It is the very definition of the word epic from the point of view of the amount of information, the amount of world building, the vastness of the lands, the vastness of the cast and the characters that you learn about, and the people and the places that you go to. It's also vast from the point of view that it's not narrow viewpoint. It's very broad. You literally you see every part of that world, and you see every experience of that world from the people within it. Like I say, they're huge books. I mean, they're arguably too long, but they're not as long as say the Wheel of Time series, which was kind of 12 books, but Game of Thrones is George R.R. Martin is a fabulous, fabulous, amazing author. Just because he draws you in, and there's so much depth, and you can touch things and smell things and taste things, and it's just it just draws you in, and it is absolutely the very definition of epic writing.
Yes, indeed. So when you're writing Coven of Shadows, is there epicness?
Yeah, so there is absolutely epicness in Coven of Shadows, in that we travel further, we go to new places that we've never been to before, we meet a lot of brand new people, and a lot of brand new places, and we learn a bit more about the magical order of warriors that Caelden is part of. He's one of the head. He's part of a group of magical warriors called Walkers, and there's reasons for that, and their magical, the source of their magical powers is revealed a little bit, but also we see the dark side of things. So it's kind of like the revealing of the Jedi and the revealing of the Sith from Star Wars, I suppose.
Oh,
So,
wow.
there's um, far more breadth, and far more viewpoints, but equally far more information and far off lands to be explored and visited, and to find out about. So yes, definitely epic.
If you want to go back and revise the book, which part of the book you want to revise?
Oh, that's a really difficult question. Do you know what? I would have to say nothing in particular. I think that there may be certain things that I would have tightened up on, but it generally, like I say, Coven of Shadows is my favorite book. It's got everything. It's got humor, it's got heart, it's got love, it's got tragedy, it's got moments of huge tension, it's got moments of where people are presented with horrendously difficult circumstances. It's filled with trauma, it's filled with magic, it's filled with kindness and fun, and you really get to understand the bond between all of the people, and why they do what they do, and what drives them, and what their fears and their hopes and their dreams are. I really wouldn't change anything about Coven of Shadows. It is to my extent my favorite book, because I just enjoy it as a writer and as a reader, and it sounds slightly self-indulgent, but you have to like what you write, otherwise you would never finish it. And like I say, I finished Coven of Shadows very, very quickly, because it's such a good book, and it is absolutely my favorite. So I'm not going to change anything, Daniel, if that's okay with you.
Yes, definitely indeed. Very well said, Mr. Gowland. But before we go on, I'm inviting you to listen to my other podcast, Comedy 101 with Mr. Mike Lucas. Please, if Book 101 review is empowering writers all over the world, Comedy 101 empower comedians all over the world. We're gonna teach you how to laugh. We're gonna teach you how to entertain other people, and as they said, laughter is the best medicine. Plus, one more, please do grab a copy of my poetry book. It's already published. Volume 1, Emotions. It's all about human emotions, sadness, happiness, and I did a poetry about that. So please do grab a copy. For again, thank you so much for supporting my Food 101, for giving us 1 million downloads. Please do support also Book 101 Review, because there's a good cause for this. We are empowering writers all over the world to write more, if, most especially if you support them, like Mr. S.C. Gowland. So, Mr. Gowland, can you please invite our listeners to buy all your books?
Oh, absolutely. If anybody would like to fancies a fun book and wants to read something different that is by an independent author, the reviews of the series are really good. Fantasy, epic fantasy at its best. Other reviews have said a fantastic read, full of snappy dialogue and emotional resonance. And relating to this book, Coven of Shadows is a great book, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. So that's other people enjoying it, not just me writing it. So you can find my books at scgowland.com, which is spelled SCGOWLAND.com, and all of the information is there.
Yes, indeed. So, Mr. Golan, what is a good characteristics of a good novel?
Um, something that something that you feel. I think any kind of a good novel is a novel that, even if you love it or hate it, I think that is the sign of a good novel, because there are often books that you read and you've forgotten about the next day, or it's a book that you read that doesn't impact you. It doesn't make you feel anything. It's just like a nothing book, and I would rather have books that people loved or hated, because at least then they feel something, rather than a book that people immediately forget about or feel nothing as in response to. So what I would hope is that people would read any of my books and feel a sense of enjoyment or fun or happiness or sadness. Yes, so a good book is always something that you can't help but keep reading, or something that makes you feel a very strong, satisfactory emotion.
Yes, indeed, and it will haunt you the rest of your life.
And maybe
just
so.
like yeah, just like the Count of Monte Cristo. It's been a long time that I read, but it's still in my mind about the triumph of revenge. Like that, people. It's a good novel. Just like Coven of Shadow of the Souls Abyss. Let's try the trilogy of Mr. Golland. It's something else, people. Mr. Gowland, The Souls of Beast. What do you think? It's good for a series or a motion picture?
Yes, I think it would be good on Netflix or on Amazon, or as it would probably be better as a TV series than a book, than a film, because there's quite a lot to it. And there are so many different points of view that you could probably make a um, season one could be book one, season two could be book two, and season three could be book three. Because I'm wanting to write three trilogies overall. So yes, definitely. If anybody at Netflix would like to get in touch, I'd be more than happy to have a discussion, because I do think that there's a lot within it that people would like, and it would resonate. And I also think that in some ways a lot of the fantasy TV series that have come out have been safe. They've gone with things that already exist, so lots of Lord of the Rings and lots of Game of Thrones, but they haven't necessarily used some of the more up to date classics, like the Brandon Sandersons of this world, or the Joe Abercrombies. Although they are meant to be bringing out Joe Abercrombie's book Best Served Cold, with Rebecca Ferguson in the main role. So it would be good to see more diversity, rather than them just sticking with the tried and tested ones that they've done so far.
Yes, interesting. Mr. Gowland, you told us before that become a series or a motion picture. Who are your cast?
Oh, that's a question I like very much, because the three main characters, like I say, the bad guy Razian would definitely be played by Mads Mikkelsen. Kaelden would be played by Alexander Skarsgård, who's been in a number of films. He's a very tall, blonde-haired actor. I'm very tall, but I don't quite have as much blonde hair as I used to have. So Alexander Skarsgård, I think, is good enough to carry that role off. There are other people within there that Angela Bassett could definitely cover some of the roles within there. Idris Elba could definitely fit in. There's an actress called Sophie Cookson who could definitely carry one of the main bad guy roles. But yeah, there's a whole load of people that I've got. I have a lovely PowerPoint presentation. Whenever I'm creating a character, I will take an image of the actor that I would like to play the role, and I build up the backstory for that person on the PowerPoint presentation. So I've got lots of PowerPoint presentations to share with any potential film people just to make their job a little bit easier.
Oh, it's amazing lineup of cast, Mr. Gowland. I hope one of these days Netflix, Amazon, Apple, or Hulu. Come on, people, let's try the Salsa Beast. So again, Mr. Gowland, invite our listeners to buy your Coven of Shadows.
Yes, Coven of Shadows is what I am going to be doing is I'm actually going to make the first book in the series, which is the Dark Crown, completely free from the 1st of July. It will be completely free at my website and completely free to download. I'm quite happy to do that because I think that it's a good way to get into things, and money is often tight. So I think if I can give away something for free and people like it, then they can go for the second book and the third book. They're very reasonably priced and less than a cup of coffee per book, which I think for a good 8 or 12 hours of reading is quite good value for money for less than the cost of a cup of coffee.
Yes, indeed, people. Let's support Mr. S.C. Garland. What is your advice for those out there want to publish their book, especially their procrastinator?
Well, for the procrastinators, my advice is do it. Don't think about it. Don't talk about it. Don't say you're going to do it. Do actually do it, because the you will always find a million different things to do to stop yourself from actually writing. If the difference between a professional and an amateur is a professional makes time, and this whole thought that you don't have any time to write a book is not true. I don't believe. I think even if you write 200 words a day, you will have a book by the end of the year. You will have added up to over 70,000 words by the end of the year, and everybody has enough time in their day to write 200 words. It's a couple of tweets. It's you can even write it on your phone on the way into work or while you stood waiting for the train. But 200 words a day, anybody can do that. And I firmly believe that if you can do 200 words a day, you can release a good book per year. So the main thing is just do it. Take it seriously, dedicate to it, but make sure you are enjoying what you're doing, because at the end of the day, the space on the bookshelf will be taken up by people who do make the time and do put the effort in. If you're not willing to put the effort in all the time, somebody else's book will take up your place on the bookshelf.
Wow, very well said, Mr. Gallant. So, people out there, if you are have the passion to writing your novel or stories, go ahead, because probably you're one of the best in the making. So, Mr. Gallant, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Daniel. Been a pleasure.
Maricon people, see you soon.